So we're going to talk about cyber terrorism and the energy sector in a way to try to get cyber experts and lawmakers to collaborate better. That's the goal. So I had to summarize 87 pages of research down into 30 some odd slides. So there's way more involved, obviously. So we're going to talk, the agenda, we're going to talk about what the problem is, key terms, literature, early research outlook from where I've gotten thus far, some cases and research, and what's next. And a special surprise in the end, a little tribute. So, who am I? I have an old little slide for that. So I'm a full-time faculty member at Purdue University Global. I also practice law. I've been licensed for coming on 6 years now, and I consult in cybersecurity. I've been in IT for the last 26 years total. Who remembers 486DX computers? First one I built. Yes, I was wondering, like, what is this dash 66 thing mean on this processor? My mother tricked me. So, been doing this for a little while. So I call it my little eye candy page. Some degrees and stuff I have a couple degrees, finishing up a doctorate right now, which is actually part of what the study is about, coincidentally. I have done a little bit of everything. I'm a military veteran. I have worked in the energy sector, so backwards in time. After I finished undergrad after the military, went and worked for the energy sector, then I worked for a hospital doing IT for a while, then went back to the energy company. My job there, which is actually tied to this topic, my job was to make sure that they were compliant with federal regulations, specifically NERC-CIP, the regulations that ties the energy company towards making sure it's secure. I did the policies, procedures, as well as implemented the actual systems themselves. Done a little bit of stuff. So, what is the problem? Obviously, the problem's pretty obvious. Cyber attacks are on the rise. That's the biggest part of it. And there has been a fundamental breakdown between cybersecurity experts as well as lawmakers when it comes to drafting these laws. That's the overarching problem that exists. Although there is obviously a need, we see it from the cybersecurity side of the house, lawmakers tend to take the approach of let's address how we feel we should address and then ask everybody second, versus everybody being at the table to start off with. I know this actually was involved in some drafting of policies back in the day. They seriously would draft the legislation and then send it to experts afterwards for their opinion, and then decide what opinion they want to take before they publish the laws. The purpose of my study was to try to explore the gaps that exist between specifically dealing with the issue of cyber terrorism itself, and to try to develop a framework to make it a little bit better and easier for everybody to talk and communicate. So before we get going, we must discuss some terminology, because there's a little bit of a difference. Cybercrime. Cybercrime is basically any crime that we're used to hearing about just involving the computer, in short. And I put up a nice little image. I forgot where I got these from. I actually have it on my notes, but these are the top 20 countries that deal with cybercrime. Then you have cyber war. So the difference between cyber war is basically there's a state actor involved, which gets really muddling in the water, and I won't get down that weed, but when you have state-sponsored and state actor are two different things. State sponsors were, for example, we say United States pays citizens to go and do things. That count as state sponsored. And then we have cyber terrorism. Really old slide, but obviously it's risen since then. So cyber terrorism versus cyber warfare, the biggest difference between terrorism and warfare has to do with the goal. It's normally for terrorism, you're dealing with destruction and something political involved. That's the biggest differentiator between the two. I think that's just the FBI's definition I have up there. So, in comparison, cybercrime, same thing, traditional. So, say, for example, trespass. Everybody knows what trespass is. There's a version of that when it comes to the cyber world as well, which is unauthorized access to a computer. Cyber war, exact same thing as cybercrime, only there's a state involved. In cyber terrorism, same thing, only different version of actors. So pretty much all the same basic stuff, but everybody views it as if it's different. Still the same basic elements. So, question, how many of you work remotely? Most of you? Now, how many of you ever work remotely, you're on your computer, and all of a sudden the power goes out? You know, anybody before? Besides her? The first thing you think is, what on earth happened? And that's kind of what spun the idea of doing the digging into this. What happens if it's not a transistor balloon, but something more nefarious is going on? That's what started me doing this digging into this research. As it was, I think 2 days ago, that CNN said that there were 5 energy attacks against the U.S. just 2 days ago. So they constantly happen. So, literature, cybercrime. So this is a little bit of history on some of the work that's been done related to it. In 1990, UK published their Computer Misuse Act. A lot of things have actually come from it globally have been modeled off of what the UK has done. Japan published one in 1999 as well. Then fast forward a tad bit. We had Canada. Canada pretty much modeled theirs off of the Europeans as well. And then France did the same thing also. So pretty much everybody modeled theirs off of what the European Union did. The Russia Federation, they modified their criminal code in 1997 to include cybercrime. And Pakistani in 2016 published a law that made it easier for law enforcement to prosecute, but from research says a little bit controversial because they didn't get any input from anybody else, including the public sector. So they kind of did what they wanted to do and then published it. And I did not have the U.S. up there, but our criminal code started modifying in the 60s and 70s related to it. Well, 70s and 80s rather. Who's heard of the Budapest Convention? Anybody? Yeah? It is the only cooperative agreement where a country said, we're going to work together to try to combat cybercrime. That's the only one that exists. Until this day, it is the only thing that comes close to dealing with the issue to this day. So convention came down and said, hey, let's break down some of these barriers as it deals with extraditing people and getting cyber criminals held accountable for the crimes they commit in whatever country they're in. That's in short how the Budapest Convention came to be. So, cyber warfare. This is where it gets really interesting because it's basically a cyber crime that's occurring, but it's a state actor. So, if I, for example, go and hack into the energy company, it's considered to be a cyber crime. If, say, for example, let's make up an island. Never Land Island decides to do the exact same thing, it's considered to be cyber war at that point because of who's doing it. Ultimately, the exact same goal is still going to be the end, but the actor is what makes the biggest difference. As they define on here, cyber war is a conflict between states where precision and proportion force is directed against military and industrial targets. Keyword is industrial. For political, economic, or territorial gain. Terrorism. Terrorism has been an issue globally for a very, very long time. That's actually a good chunk of the research specifically dealt with terrorism itself. But from a global perspective, the UK and the US are pretty much the forerunners when it comes to trying to combat terrorism from a global front. The US has taken it upon themselves to be the front runner of that. They self-proclaimed themselves on that one. Despite there being a global recognition for a need to combat terrorism, there isn't a global cooperation as well. Every country pretty much takes the position that our job is to protect our citizens, and therefore we're going to combat terrorism the way we feel it should be combated, versus looking at it for what it is, which is a global issue. Just because one country may get attacked doesn't mean that that same group won't attack another country. So it's a global problem. It's not an individual country problem, which is part of the argument that I make. Then we get to cyber terrorism. So cyber terrorism goal is just like traditional terrorism. There's going to be some type of political reasons behind it. Generally speaking, the goal is still destruction at the end of the day. There are a couple different ways they go about it, but cyber terrorism itself became a little bit more complicated when terrorists started using the cyber world to recruit, which comes up later on when it comes to chatting. So they would use things such as propaganda via the internet and also use chat rooms in order to recruit people to get them to join the organization. So cyber terrorism is not just let me attack your computer, but it's also let me recruit you to join our organization, do whatever we want to do as well. categories. We have weapons of mass destruction. So who knew about the Chernobyl disaster of 1986? Anybody heard of that one? Yeah. That one was indirectly caused because of cyber world. It was caused because of a computer issue. So that was the beginning of that problem. We have weapons of mass distraction, such as fake news and propaganda. I think I've heard my fair share of the phrase fake news over the last 4 years now, roughly. I've heard the phrase fake news more in the last 4 years than I have my entire life. We have then weapons of mass disruption. The idea behind disruption is to break away citizens' access to something. So it could be break away your access towards water, break away your access towards power, break away your access towards the internet itself. Then you have your hybrid warfare, which is obviously a combination of all the ones above, and then something called unlimited warfare. Unlimited warfare is basically no man's land. Have you ever seen the movie Mad Max, where everybody's on theirs is kind of chaotic? That's the equivalency of unlimited warfare. No holds barred, everybody doing what they want to do in the cyber world. That's unlimited warfare. All right, legal system around cyber terrorism. So, United States, the big overarching one for that is the U.S. Patriot Act. Extremely controversial in some points. Researchers actually said that it was emotionally charged when it was written because of some incidents that have happened in the United States. It obviously has brought a lot of controversy on later on because it pretty much how can I phrase this? The Patriot Act has been used as justification for a lot of things that the U.S. wants to do. We'll put it that way. India. We have the IT Act of 2000, which was later amended in 2008, which has the National Cyber Coordination Center and the Indian Cyber Crime Coordination Center. Then Europe decided to do the European Network of Information Security Agency, ENISA, and they addressed cybersecurity limit as a level 4 and level 5 issue. Cyber terrorism level 4, cyber warfare is level 5. So you imagine there's 5 levels to this equation. Then you have the legal system around the energy sector. So a lot of this is geared specifically towards the United States. And it wasn't my intent to deal with just United States. It's just how things end up turning out a tad bit. When I started my study, I reached out to people in the energy sectors literally across the world. Getting responses back was a little bit harder than finding people. Pretty good at finding folks. Getting communication back was pretty hard. But I have had some conversation with people in different countries. So I know that the way the energy sectors are governed in other countries is greatly different. It varies literally from one place to another place within the exact same region. So that being said, that does obviously create some muddling in the water when it comes to trying to address things. But the U.S. has been the one who's historically actually started the ball rolling in developing laws to govern the way the energy sector works. In '84, Ronald Reagan came out with the National Security Directive 145. That started the ball rolling. In 1990, Bush decided to further that a tad bit on with Directive 42, which said everybody need to coordinate this thing, coordinate effort. 2011, President Obama came in and penned the International Security Strategy for Cyberspace. In 2013, 2015, he also passed directives specifically geared towards critical infrastructure and its protection, which brought in NERC-CIP. Northern Electric Reliability Commission. Critical Infrastructure Protection is what that acronym stands for. Has anybody here ever heard of it? No one's heard of it? Okay. So NERC-CIP is what most people in the energy sector run away from. It's the scariest thing in the world if you ask them. So NERC-CIP is actually a set of standards that the government said that you have to comply with. The reason why most people run away from that, if they see it, obviously you have no choice but to deal with if you're an energy company. The reason why most people run away from it is because of how strict it is. So for example, an employee gets fired. Most people fire employees on Friday, right? You have 24 hours to remove the access to every system. If you don't, you can get fined up to $1 million per day of missing violation. Let's see what else is in there. If a person transfers to a different department, you have 30 days to remove their access from folders, but 14 days to remove 7 or 14. I think it's 14 to remove their access to those systems themselves. You have to do things such as it requires you to have antivirus protection, endpoint protection on every computer that you must regularly and frequently check up on. Let's see. It's extremely detailed. In some cases, it actually tells you what to do. So, for example, with access, you have to have two-factor authentication, period. If you don't have it, that's a violation. So if you've not heard of NERC-CIP, then no one in here probably knows about what happened to Duke Energy in 2019, I think it was. 2019, they got fined $15 million for violating that. So that's how strict of a regulation it is. It has been used as the model by other countries for how they should approach their infrastructure from the energy sector. And my job in the power company was to make sure we were compliant with that. So I managed systems such as RSA, for example. Active Directory was one of mine as well. I had endpoint protection, group policies. My job was to make sure all that stuff was compliant with NERC-CIP. Made the company policies, procedures, implemented those systems themselves. Not all of it, obviously. I had a total of 6 different systems I was managing out of 13. And fell under the purview. Then do all the evidence for it, give it to the federal government, and then go and sit in front of them and testify at full-on hearing, doing the audit. So, good old NERC-CIP. If you ever want to know how to model your stuff, who here knows of NIST? This was built off of NIST. So imagine taking this and then giving it steroids. Yeah, there we go. That's about the best way of describing it. All right, who's heard of the International Criminal Court? Somebody, yes. There has been first, International Criminal Court was established because of the Roman Statute in Article 1. 13 parts, 128 articles. They only deal with 4 different things: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. There are 120, I think it's 126 or 20, I think 126 states that have signed of it. Not all who have signed it have ratified. The United States did initially sign, did not ratify, and kind of tried to back away from it. The UK, the other leader in the terrorism world, is fully signed and ratified. They're full state part at this point. They were brought up because there has been an extreme amount of push to try to get the ICC to take on terrorism itself. They have refused to do it for a few reasons. One being, they said that it would overcrowd the courts if they brought that in their purview. But there was a manual that came out that gave ideas of how they could go about approaching it, which was the Talon Manual. Your Talon Manual is a piece of scholarly work that I think about 20 or so people total over the course of 3 years went into giving their opinion on the state of the laws that existed at that point in time as it pertained to cyber warfare and cyber terrorism itself. They came out to tell you, so it was a bunch of scholars, did a bunch of articles and say, hey, you can apply this stuff to what you already have if you look at it from this approach. So if you look at genocide in this way, so we have a person who breaches a reactor. The reactor then kills a bunch of people. Why not call that genocide? That's kind of what the Tanya Manual did in a nutshell. Unfortunately, ICC decided to reject this adoption. They said that and partly because of the opinion aspect of it, it's purely opinion on how things could work. I said, okay, when I learned about this as well, I said, well, let's try doing a different approach. Let's not just get pure opinion. Let's get some science behind this. Let's actually do some studies. Maybe that'll change somebody's mind. So what did I do? Started researching. Did some early research. So I went and found a questionnaire. And the questionnaire, these were basically the ideas behind the questionnaire itself. The questionnaire went out to security experts that work in the energy sector, as well as lawmakers themselves, tied towards these topics. The goal was to try to identify gaps in the communication, room for improvement, but I did a little bit differently. I also looked for what are the issues from the technology's perspective. And one thing that I did get back from the results from all this is there's an issue that is not unique to the United States, it's unique to the world when it comes to the technology side of the house. So, I'll get to that part. That comes at a different part of the results. Legal cases. After I got finished sending my questionnaire out, then I went and reviewed some case law. On the left-hand side, we have jurisdiction. These cases, in short, discusses the ability for a company or a person, let me phrase that, discuss the ability for a entity, which includes people, to be brought under the purview of a court. So when it comes to jurisdiction, you have two different types. You have subject matter jurisdiction and you have personal jurisdiction. Subject matter jurisdiction is the court's ability to actually hear the case because of the topic that's being discussed. Personal jurisdiction is their ability to enforce themselves upon you. These cases right here were cases that came about that dealt with how to pull a person into a court's jurisdiction. International Shoe was one of the landmark cases that dealt with out of state, pulling one person in pulling a company in from a different state. Then we had something called the Zippo case that came after that, which dealt with minimal contacts. Yahoo dealt with bringing in somebody that was foreign as well. So all these cases on the left dealt with how we can pull someone into someone's jurisdiction, or if it's not even possible. And the last two aren't even the United States, by the way. Internet surveillance. Did that one in the middle, so three-pronged approach. Internet surveillance, that particular case dealt with whether, actually dealt with a pen register, whether it is legal or not to record communications as they happen. And at what point does a warrant need to be done before they can start pulling communication in, or recording what you say? Which led to the third one, chat room and email. And in short, those cases basically say that you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Let me phrase that. You have a limited to no expectation of privacy when it comes to things you post in the chat room. Which is the reason why I brought that up earlier, that terrorists are now recruiting using chat rooms. Enter in the court cases that says the government has the ability to monitor those that they want and use them in a hearing. So, preliminary proposal, and this came from off of the responses I got back from the surveys. What can we do as it looks right now? Three-pronged approach, three-axis approach. On one end, we have the infrastructure. One of the results came back saying that there is an extremely outdated set of infrastructure. And actually the talk that comes after this as well, that talks about SCADA, ICS, and OT as well. So I put a little bonus slide on the end to give a little bit break, to give a segue for his speak to come in, his talk. So that's one of the biggest issues that came up. There's outdated equipment. Much of the systems that are used in SCADA and industrial control systems uses Modbus, which is an extremely vulnerable protocol. So we have a lot of equipment out here that's really, really old that is still being used because it works. And really, really old stuff tends to have really, really big vulnerabilities, obviously. So that was the first thing that came back with. Also, there's an issue when it comes to talent. There's an issue when it comes to finding individuals who have the knowledge to deal with the problems and actually secure stuff. That's why I love security conferences. It's a bunch of hungry minds that are here trying to learn new stuff and expand their horizons. Next up came the legal and legislative community. One of the biggest things that I got back from literally every single response I got back was there was a complete lack of cooperation between the energy sectors and legislative bodies. Complete lack of cooperation between the two. It's more along the lines of here's what we want, go do, versus let's sit down on the table and do this together. Which means obviously that there needs to be more cooperation. Next big issue came in. There is a gap between the understanding of how cybersecurity actually works and the legal community's ability to enforce a law that actually could work. So we know how things work in the cyber world. And then you have the legal side of the house that says, well, we want this done. You're like, but that's just not going to work. But we said do it. You don't have a choice but to do it and find some way to make it work, which leaves problems. So why not start that from the onset? Which there are people like me who understands both the legal side and the security side to say, look, how about at least have one of us at the table when you're meeting so we can translate between the two parties and try to come to a common ground. Last but not least, we have the international part. Internationally, there has to be coordination between everybody across the board to deal with this. I think it's impossible for one country, and history has shown, obviously, it's impossible for one country to tackle this by themselves. So it needs to be more about just your citizens, but citizens in general, people in general, to deal with the problem. Which brings on future research. So I actually have to close the study out because the IRB told me I had to. I have to actually close the study out in about a week and a half, 2 weeks roughly. So once I finish the study this phase of the study, I plan on taking it on to the next stop. Next stop is going to look at the infrastructure itself, dig more into what is going on and how can we improve the infrastructure itself versus the overarching part. So this would basically be the precursor to digging deeper in the weeds down the road. So the study's not going to end here, obviously. I'm going to continue going. Let's see if we can figure out what kind of training gaps exist. I know of maybe 2 or 3 schools that have classes specifically geared towards dealing with industrial control system security. Only about 2 or 3 schools actually have those that I've researched anyway. I'm sure there's more out there that actually have classes specifically towards that so we can learn how OT works itself and do more research into international organizations. From a legal side of the house, I'm going to see if I can figure out what nexuses exist. And nexus is basically connection. What nexuses exist between the different countries, see if we can find a way to basically take advantage of what's already there. If there's already some type of cooperative agreement, if A likes B and C likes B, why can't A and C meet together and have a conversation? See if we can find a way to admit that. And yes, that's Pythagorean's theorem, if anybody remembers that. So that is what's up next for me. Now, I put a little bonus on there. I said I would bring this up towards the end. We'll talk about some of the technology stuff so you understand a bit of the problem. So everybody in here understands the way modern computer systems work. We have operating system. We have all this stuff installed on it. But imagine, okay, so who in here likes classic cars? You like classic cars? What's your favorite?
The Camaro 69.
Ooh, okay. Okay, so imagine taking a Camaro 69, outfitting it with a GPS system, and somehow changing the ignition from using the Camaro 69 using a distributor cap, moving the distributor cap and having completely wired into a computer. That's the equivalency of what's been going on with the energy sector. Right. You still have the same spark plugs, same spark wires. You still have the same basic mechanical system that's in place that's being outfitted to work with a computer, which obviously means you can have some problems. If I want to trip up your Camaro, there's 2 ways I can do it from the computer side of the house, obviously, or I can exploit something that's tied to the actual mechanics itself, such as the old banana in the tailpipe. That'll stop the car from running and mess up your emissions. Like cars too, so. So, SCADA systems, ICS, and DCS. SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition systems. This is your software and your hardware. And then you have like your PLCs, for example, your programming logical components as well. Then you have your industrial control system. There's a picture that's coming up next that kind of gives you overarching how this stuff pulls together. And then you have your DCS, your distributed control systems, which are basically take that and then branch out a tad bit more than just that one location because of geographical dispersion. So within each, ICS sits on top of both of these, but within your SCADA system and your DCS systems and ICS as a whole, you have a lot of really old components, really old switches, really old temperature gauges and sensors. All that stuff can be exploited. I wish I would have had enough time. Obviously, I could have gone. There's a demonstration I have. If you ever have opportunity to get something called SCADA. It's a virtual machine you can download that simulates a SCADA an entire control system. And you can use that system to exploit it for those who like to hack and find out ways to trigger alarms. SCADA is pretty cool. This is how it sits from an overarching picture. So OT, ICS, and then of course SCADA and DCS sits inside of those. So you can get an understanding of the topic that's coming up next as well in the issue itself. So if you're looking at it from this little thing, so if you're looking at it, most of the problems will say sits inside of here. But if this is compromised, then obviously the rest of it's going to be an issue also. And in summary, got tribute next. In summary, we need to do a better job at collaborating between the energy sectors, which obviously where the cybersecurity experts lie. Rewind. First, we have to have more people in cybersecurity go and work for the energy companies. There is an extreme. You can ask anybody who works in an energy company who's in hiring. There is a big knowledge gap. They have a lot of difficulty finding individuals that can do this stuff. So may not be the most rewarding from an national standpoint, but think about the bigger picture also. I did it for 3 years. So think about the bigger picture. From there, you need to have a bigger collaboration between the cybersecurity world and the legal world. Again, when I was at the power company for 2 of my 3 years, we would review legislation. So in the state of Alabama was one of the last states to actually pass a data breach law. They were one of the very last ones. And what they would do, and I was part of that process, they would draft up a law. Whoever senator it is would draft up a law, and they would send it to different people within companies. They would then have a team within that particular company. So it was 4 of us within the company. We would get the law, review the law, and then give our feedback on it. Out of those 4 people, I was the only one that actually had a legal background. They would also send that law not just to us, but they would also send it to law firms and stuff like that as well to get their opinion on it. They would take that, look at all the comments, and then publish a final draft. I can promise you when I say this, I've read not more than just that one. I've actually reviewed that one. I reviewed 3 presidential election, 3 presidential directives as well, and a few other things. So the bulk of the feedback that happens doesn't get put into these laws. Maybe 1%. I know from a fact from looking at these things in the final version that there were things that were just completely ignored. So there has to be better collaboration with that. You're giving the law, these laws are imposing us. You kind of got to take our opinion on this stuff. We know if we can actually do it or not. And as promised, on the tribute page, that's my mommy. So on exactly today, 5 years ago, we had my mother's funeral. So it's a real moment. 5 years ago to this date was my mommy's funeral. She was how I got started in IT back in the 1990s. It was all her fault. So she was one of the first women in computers. She started doing computer classes and teaching people how to type. If anybody remembers Mavis Beacon from a very long time ago, she taught people on Mavis Beacon how to type. And she went from teaching people how to type to building computers, teaching folks how to program, the whole 9 yards, networking, everything else. She became a Microsoft partner and all this fun stuff. She did a lot within probably a 5-6 year period until I went to college. And I think the first weekend I was there, she had a stroke. And that slowly but surely started shutting her business down. And after that, her business kind of folded because of the person she left in charge of her company. Literally distorted the company for money. So because of that, because my mom was a wonderful story, the school that I work at started this whole scholarship for my mommy. So now my mommy has her own scholarship. So it's a real moment. They told me I had the ability on the day of her funeral to actually share the news. My mommy has her own scholarship so that individuals who want to go to school and learn cybersecurity, learn this field, can get money to help them pay for school. So doesn't benefit me to go still. Thank you. Thank you. And that's it. Questions? Had to stop myself from crying up here. Yes.
You said Duke Energy had a fine in 2019. It was at $15 million. Right?
Mm-hmm.
that a lot?
15 million, from a fine standpoint, yes. So
For an energy company, is that a lot?
from a fine standpoint, yes. So the way most of the companies work is you have your base salary and then you have your bonuses that you get. Your bonuses are tied towards how much money they make from selling up energy, the overall management of the company, and things such as fines. So a $15 million fine means that you wouldn't meet your performance percentage, so your bonuses start getting affected. So some of the bonuses, to give you an idea of how much of an impact that boils down to, once you hit, say, the management level and start getting into the executive side of the house, some bonuses were large enough people went and bought houses with their bonus checks for the year. So yeah, 15 million is a significant amount of money from that perspective.
Compared to, say, things like GDPR.
Oh, it's nothing compared to GDPR.
Revenue.
I think, oh my God, I think GDPR's largest one is like, what, 150 million, I think, right now? So yeah, it's nothing compared to that. That's 10%.
So, if the potential fines and non-compliance with NERC were tied to revenue percentage,
Mm-hmm.
you think that would help drive further security improvements in the sector?
No, I think that if they really want to drive force to home as opposed to tying to revenue percentages, then you will have another issue to deal with. You have the Public Service Commission, which is PSC, which governs how much a power company can charge for power in the United States. So you run the risk of them having that cap. So the money has to come from somewhere. But if they really want to enforce it and push it, get those $1 million fines per day. That's a quick way to get there without tying towards revenue. No, that's an easy way to do it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hello. Hi.
Hello.
So, nice talk. I appreciate it, like the intersection of the topics. So, my question is, how do you see like computer people science learning laws or law people learning computer science?
Oh.
Because you are one guy in the middle, but I've been in that burden, understanding law enforcement people talking about how do we do this? Then, the court says you cannot do this because the law says that. And then the technician says, hey, but we cannot do anything of this. We need to do it the other way around.
Right.
So, I mean, how would you deal and where would you put the money on the knowledge,
I would go with the computer people learning the law. The path that I went, the skills that you learning information technology gives you the analytical ability that's necessary to get to law school a lot easier, as opposed to learning that and having that approach of things and then trying to look at the constraints that cyber world gives you. I think it's easier to go from computers to law than the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, the bad news is that we have a lot of people that they don't have this kind of preparation, and they are enforcing the power, and it's very difficult to deal with those. But
yeah, what triggered me getting actually the military is the reason why I got in law school, coincidentally, but all because of the military. But also I had an instructor who told me, I said, I'm kind of thinking about getting into the legal world, and he said, well, if you do it, you'll be one of very few people that do both. So he said it would probably be easier for you. He said himself, his name was Dr. Julio Rivera. He was my professor at UAB. He actually is retiring now, but he said it would be easier to move from that field over because of the analytical stuff that we deal with in technology. I have not met a single person that went from law backwards. So
that's a good point. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
It is very interesting how you are studying the gaps of legal frameworks. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, how do you use data? How do you analyze data to get into these to get these results? So about the statistical significance of the answers and these.
The research methodology. So, okay. So it's actually a multiple case study that I did in long run with the questionnaire as well. So I pulled a lot of cases. So I have, if I remember correctly, around 50 something legal cases that I pulled. Actually, I think, no, the book's not my book bag, but I actually went and found 4 different case books that cover cyber law, terrorism, international law, and computer crime. Use those 4 case books to pull cases out of that would give me the information that could be transferable across. That gave my legal cases. From there, I went into the questionnaire and started, and it was a total of 15 questions. If anybody fits the requirements, please, I have one more week to actually do questionnaires. But it's just 15 questions total. And once I got the answers back to those, I looked for common trends between how every question was answered and used that to create my statistical analysis on it by seeing that what actually was, what kept repeating over and over again. When I tell you for example, one person gave me a response back that was around 3 pages long to answer 15 questions. So a lot of digging, a lot of digging. And then once you get that data, then you cross it back over with the law cases, look for familiarities to get the final product.
Thank you.
No problem. Any more questions? Yes.
One more question. So you said at the beginning that it's pretty US-centric and UK-centric, still looking at the global scale. So do you think it's plausible that with all the tension we have globally, like the US versus EU with the GDPR stuff, do you think it's plausible that for cybercrime we can find some kind of global legal solution?
I think it is. If we can all say that genocide is bad and everybody across the world votes that genocide is bad, then we can probably do the same. There's always hope. If there wasn't any hope, then we're basically saying we're doomed to deal with this forever until humanity exists.
Well, there is an ongoing experiment about that right now.
Yes. Yes, true. Very true. Very true. It's interesting, actually, it's happening right now when I'm doing this research topic, right? More questions? Well, thank you very much for your time.